that's a tricky, slippery slope for some people, not for all. I see Louis now also joined. Hey, Louis, how's it going? I think Louis is still maybe setting up. Just for everyone's consent, I am recording. Might want to post this a bit later on the Tube of the U for people that couldn't attend. So I just want to make sure that everyone's cool with that.
I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Nice. Okay, cool. So thanks everyone for attending. Like I said, this is a fireside chat, so we're keeping it nice and open. Bit of house rules. Just if you're not speaking, mute those mics, especially if you don't have a headset. I see most of us are good in that department. And then if you have a question mid-sentence, if someone is speaking, raise your hand. Let them finish preferably, but then once they're done, you guys can obviously interact. Yeah, so the idea of this is just to have a fireside chat. The problem that I have with YouTube, it's a very kind of one-sided chat. You don't get to interact a lot. And I decided, like, let me try Teams out, use this platform where we can actually interact and have a nice discussion. And then we can also post the videos afterwards. And if it's very good content, we can even make it into a podcast or whatever. So that's the idea behind it, to keep it nice and interactive and raise a bit of points and stuff and have a good discussion around lots of these topics. The main thing being state-proof and becoming more self-sufficient and resilient. That's kind of the thing I'm driving from my side a lot, and it seems to be gaining a lot of momentum given where we are in this country. So yeah, thank you all for joining. If everyone wants to, like, of course, we're such a nice and small group, wants to give a little small introduction, floor's open. Go ahead, please. I'll start. Okay. Okay, sorry, Dione. I'm Carter. I am a self-starter, visionary, and entrepreneur. I'm joking. I hate those terms. I started the White Noise podcast, which was first off kind of a battle of ideas thing, and I just decided, screw it. My core was more about self-sufficiency. And I decided to kind of dedicate everything that I am and my whole life towards this. And I've made actual steps towards that end, moved out of the city, moved to a farm, getting my fire license, house in order, planting my own food. At the end of the day, I don't want to buy anything from the stores. I want to produce most of my own food and become completely self-sufficient as far as I can, create robust communities, and also obviously start with my own stuff, grow mushrooms. Hell, there's a lot of things I want to do. I've got a tower that I want to grow strawberries in. So I'm on this whole journey, and I want to show people how they can actually grow and not make excuses, because a lot of people are like, oh, I need land to grow. Bullshit. You can have a container in your windowsill. You can take a cutling of most herbs, put it in a bottle, clone that bitch, plant it. And I want to make it very accessible and easy and idiot-proof for everyone, so they can at least start where they are. You don't have to be on a farm or anywhere else. You can actually start in the cities. So I'm hoping to enable that. There's a lot of competent people out there. I want to get them all involved if they're interested and get this ball rolling. And yeah, that's me.
I'll go next because I actually was going to go first, because you know women, they fucking don't know their place. And so I'm essentially the quintessential person who's worked with her mind all her life to my detriment, and I've come to realize that it's actually been incredibly unhealthy for me. There's been a massive imbalance. Actually, I know I did a PhD in philosophy and I pursued that educational path, and it's regrettable that I couldn't actually continue on that road because the left has fucking destroyed everything. But my first desire was actually to be a game ranger, to actually live in nature. And from a small child, that's what I thought I would be one day. And I departed from that road for a lot of complex reasons, but a lot of people don't know, but Carter and I are a couple, and actually we live in Bethlehem together. And when we met, we very quickly decided that we didn't want to live in the city anymore. And I'd wanted that for the longest time because in Canada, I lived in a very rural space where I actually had access to, I was living literally in the middle of a forest with a river and animals all around me. And it was gorgeous. I mean, except for the fucking snow that just fucking won't stop, except for that. And I wanted to come back to a place where I actually felt like myself. And South Africa was the only place where I felt like myself because of the people here and the way we live and the way we are. It's completely distinct to every other place. And I know a lot of people want to immigrate. That's fine. But I've lived in England. I've lived in Canada. I've traveled across many fucking continents. And I can tell you now, there's no place like South Africa. We are so different from every other place on the planet. And Carter and I decided that we didn't want that way of life anymore. And we've now embraced a rural way of life. And all I can say is, to the better. It's helped me in so many ways. I can go into detail about that, but I won't right now. And yeah, it's been a completely new start. And I'm so happy about that.
Okay, I'm guessing I'll go. Yeah, I really don't have the kind of storied story that you guys have. So yeah, let me start at the beginning. My name is Koketso, surname Resane. Yeah, I'm really just a guy. So I've been a Joburger for north of 20 years now. I've been in Joburg since 1998. Didn't grow up here. Grew up in Mafikeng, Unit 2. Lovely place, a lot less lovely now. So I've unfortunately, last time I was there, I can see it deteriorating. I still have family there and the likes, but yeah, I've just seen how it deteriorates, and it's not the Mafikeng I grew up in. But that's essentially where I grew up, and I've been in Joburg since 1998. It's been one hand of a ride. Finished primary, high school, varsity, started working, all of that while still in Joburg. So I really don't have intentions of leaving, or it's going to take something very dramatic for me to leave. So yeah, I've basically been building my life around here. In terms of a little bit more about me, few people know this, but I am kind of pursuing a journey of minimalism a bit. So yeah, I'm really not trying to acquire assets and the likes. I have no dreams of living in a big house, for example. I'm trying to keep things to, as necessary as and essential as possible. And yeah, that's kind of the journey I've been building. Can't kick my usual habits, though, including the cup of coffee I'm having right now. So yeah, really, for me, I think the entire premise of state-proofing your life is for where I am in life. There's quite a lot to think about, The responsible thing is to do what others have done and walk the same road that others have, particularly when it comes to things like finances and the like. Conventional wisdom says you do an RA, you do savings, you do investments and all of that, but all of those aren't exactly separate from the state. The state is looking at putting its claws into all of those, even actively preventing you or us from exploring alternative avenues, particularly abroad and the like. So it's really an interesting conversation that I'd like to have, because I'm starting to lean towards the inkling that perhaps your money's safer in your mattress than in a savings account, for example. So yeah, I'm just bringing it up as a joke here, but this is something to actually consider. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at this for now.
Okay, let me go next. I'm Xavier Bapoo. A few of you might know me from Twitter. And basically, long story short, I'm a Joburg boy, grew up, 6th generation, never been pretty much, on a farm or growing my own stuff specifically. I think it was during lockdown where I took the whole state-proofing idea a little more seriously. I was one of those paranoid freaks who in November 2019 predicted 100% things were going to go south. Nobody believed me. And then when it happened, nobody believed me again. So a bit of a paradox there. And then during lockdown, I was one of the fortunate few with savings. That lasted all of 6 months. Then I'm currently at war with the banks, which is it's a lot of fun. Keep your money in a mattress, Koketso. And right now, at this moment, I'm looking for the most cost-effective ways to be completely state-proof, where you're not relying on credit, you're not relying on financing of a house, you're not relying on financing a vehicle, you're not relying on big shopping centers and imports where the crowd suddenly clear out the toilet paper and then you can never get toilet paper or medicine or tomatoes, or we had that big tomato thing. So it's the world we live in is becoming completely fragile, where one crazy thing is said on Twitter and the entire real world starts changing. So I want to live completely insulated from that on the lowest budget possible. And that's basically my story.
So I'd actually like to open this conversation with something that Carter and I actually argue about a lot. So I've lived in England and Canada. And I actually entered England when it wasn't crazy yet. By that I mean it wasn't infiltrated by leftists yet. It was heading that way, but it hadn't reached that point where it was essentially compromising all the educational standards, becoming tyrannical, becoming authoritarian. I was lucky enough to get that degree without experiencing that yet. Then I moved to Canada, and Canada is a completely different animal because I actually was friends with someone from Canada when I was in England. She'd come there to do a degree, and I found her views to be so radical in terms of their authoritarian nature. So her form of feminism, her form of political correctness was something completely foreign to me as someone who is a classical liberal. I believe in freedom of speech. I believe you get to do whatever you want to do as long as it doesn't infringe on the rights of anyone else. That seems to be a very commonsensical view, in my opinion. And I still went to Canada because it was an opportunity for me to do my PhD. That is why I went, because I knew there was no other way I could do it, and it was my dream to be a professor in philosophy. That was my dream. So I went. And when I got there in 2013, that was the year I would literally go out with my lecturers, my fellow colleagues, and they said to me, Dione, we are not like America. We don't have this radical left or right position. When we have elections, they're pretty much towards the center, so nothing really changes. Within the next year, Trudeau was elected, and everything shifted drastically towards the left. So fucking fast. And where it manifested most pronouncedly was in academia. That is where it manifested. You could not say certain things. You could not have certain opinions. In a field like philosophy, where you get to question everything, we were told, no. You can no longer question these things because they are orthodoxy. They are the party line, and you either conform or we ostracize you, which is exactly what happened. My ex and I were completely ostracized from that entire community because we wouldn't conform, because we wouldn't consent, because we didn't agree, which was in keeping with philosophy. If you're a philosopher, you question everything.
So wait, I have to ask, is this now at an academic level or?
At the highest academic level.
Yeah.
One of the best institutions, this is University of Western Ontario. So it's one of the best institutions in Canada and worldwide. It is known for, in fact, I'll give you a good example. It is known for being the top university in philosophy of science. And yet, I was forced to take a course, and I will tell this story because I think it will be proof to many that I actually have been exposed to left-wing thinking in an academic context. I was forced to take feminist critiques of philosophy of science. The reason that was instructive was because we actually went through the evolution of how the critique of philosophy of science developed. And there are people who criticized the way that philosophy of science developed in a legitimate way, in a philosophical way. They basically said these scientists went in with biases, and we can prove this. Then it shifted to postmodernism. There's no such thing as truth. There's no such thing as any kind of legitimate position, because we can question anything, because we can claim victimhood no matter what. And all of the people in my cohort were like, okay, well, that's clearly gone too far. I mean, that's clearly not philosophical. That's essentially putting forward the preposition that you are a victim. You have been violated. It's not actually putting that to the test. So yes, I was put to the test in terms of my education in all the ways of postmodern thought, political thought, all of that stuff. Yes, I know it very well. And what Carter and I have been debating is there any sense in moving overseas? And the reason I'm bringing this up is because, like with Trudeau, things can change in a moment. So you can be in a country where there's political, economical stability, and within a moment, it can all be shot to hell. So isn't your better bet to stay in your own country where you have a network, you know how things work, you know how to get around those systems, and you can create a better life for yourself, like he and I are trying to do in a rural setting, where the state doesn't have as much control. I'll leave it there.
Xavier, go.
That's pretty interesting, and thanks for sharing your perspective on Canada, because, you know, I don't think, because, you know, Canada doesn't show up in the news often. I don't think a lot of people understand how fast that trajectory went. It was literally overnight, as fast as COVID was. You know, things just changed. Trudeau was suddenly president. This was impossible. You know, Canada's always been conservative. They chose the guy that was never supposed to win. It wasn't expected. I was happy for Trudeau. At that point in my life, I was more on the leftist side. You know, people called me woke. People assumed I was a socialist. People assumed, you know, I like the idea of welfare. I'm a capitalist at heart. But it's interesting you say that, because if you look at what's happening now in Japan, which is a, you know, authentic conservative country, they, you know, you look funny. There's a saying in Japan that the nail that stands out gets hammered. They're very serious about that. If you've been to Japan, you understand how, you know, conservative their society is. You can't do certain things that we do in the street. We consider it normal, you know, like screaming out to a friend in the street. In Japan, that's, you know, it's immoral. You know, their society operates very conservatively, and you're seeing a change now with the, it started with the LGBTQ, I can never keep up with the acronym. It started with that group, and initially Japan was never friendly to that group. It was very hard for that group to exist in Japan. Started with that group, now it's gone to cosplay, where, you know, Japan is known for anime. It's been known for anime since the 1980s. But now people are dressing up as anime characters in the street, and it's freaking out society. So they're slowly moving, and I don't think the Japanese understand it. They don't see it as a threat as yet, but I estimate maybe 5 years, you'll start seeing it. And then with regards to, you know, state-proofing yourself, when the lockdown hit, there were a great deal of South Africans in China, working there, you know, living there, studying there even. And those people immediately overnight, our government is not the most reliable, despite our good relations with China. There was no immediate action to say, we're bringing our people back. They slept like our politicians usually do. And our people in China were freaking out because cities were being locked down. They were literally sealing you in your home if they suspected you were having COVID. So if your neighbors heard you cough, they reported you, and they sealed your door with tape, and you could not come out. If you came out, you were arrested and taken to a hospital. There's a lot that happened in China that is completely undocumented. Nobody knows about it. But I know because I have people there who live there, work there, or study there. And it is shocking as to what happened. Within days, the state was in control of everything. You could not get out. You could not shop. If your house was empty and you had no groceries, it wasn't like our hard lockdown where you could tell a policeman, oh, I need baby milk. Even here, people got arrested for that as well. But China was so strict because of their state control that even what you tweeted or even what you put on social media could get you removed from your house and detained just because you were exposing what was happening with COVID. So I think the idea that, Carter has started with, going state-proof, it is important. It's something that Americans have always believed in, and it served them very well. For the most part, some of the conservative states in America are state-proof. And we're seeing that now with a lot of governors saying, go to hell, Biden, we're not wearing masks. Or go to hell, we're not vaccinating 3 times. And, that state-proofing has been in their federal system for years, ever since the Civil War. And it's actually served them well. So thank you for highlighting the Canada issue. And I think, as the world slowly declines, being state-proof is going to make sense because it's funny. Mike Abel actually put up a poll today where he asked a general question: how much do you distrust or how much do you trust the government? And he didn't say ANC, he didn't say South African government, he just said the government. And 98% was the final tally poll of distrust. And that number has, I think, if we had to do this pre-COVID, that number would be a lot less. I think it's COVID that has changed people's perceptions on the state and how much they control. I mean, who bans cooked chicken? That was a ridiculous ban. And yet we had it. We experienced it. We were there on Twitter fighting for chicken at Woolworths. This was real stuff. So yeah, Kara, you take over.
That's a lot of good insights there. And then I have to slam the hammer on the flip-flops and the T-shirts and training equipment and all the other things. It's the most ludicrous, arbitrary things. And then they take our booze and then they take our cigarettes. I mean, what more of a way to show disdain to the people than doing all these things? The government doesn't love you. They hate you. Like everything they've done now in the lockdown. I mean, water gunning people that are on SASSA grant lines, where they water cannon the shit out of those people. The riots, the disdain, everything you've seen, it's incredible. And I think I want to touch on something. I've had this in my previous discussion, but I like highlighting this. The West effectively, with mass production and China becoming a global player, we've outsourced a lot of our manufacturing. We once were, especially America, even South Africa, is still very strong in the manufacturing side of things. We actually created products and goods, and then obviously we had a strong service economy, but that has shifted, right? We're more now into a service economy than we are in a manufacturing economy. With time, what happens, and the whole world is now actually in this debate, right? Yes, we get better prices, but what is the cost? Well, the quality of goods in the last 10 years, I don't know if you guys have been keeping track, in most cases have been actually becoming lower quality. Shit breaks much easier than it used to, 1. And then 2, we are losing skills. The people that used to make boots and like proprietary things that were hardcore and actually very durable, these people are dying out, and they actually had to change professions because ridiculous labor laws and legislation forced people out of the manufacturing sector. We decimated our entire textile industry with legislation. It's basically dead now. We can't compete globally with anyone. Minimum wages, etc., coming in. And what we've done actually in the long haul, and this is something I don't think it's highlighted enough, we've outsourced all our skills to China and other countries. We've completely outsourced it. Now they are not only manufacturing goods, they are manufacturing the vaccines, they are manufacturing medical equipment, they are manufacturing electronics, they are manufacturing everything. And most countries have no manufacturing capacity at all. And now after the whole COVID thing, these countries are like basically like, oh my God, if we go to war with China or have a disagreement with them, they can cut us off in any way they choose to. So China has this massive power at this stage, and we've just outsourced all our capabilities to them. And people don't talk about this enough. And bringing that back means major labor and law reforms around manufacturing goods, giving tax rebates to people that manufacturing things, increasing the amount of, let's say, decreasing the, well, let's say that you have to give tax incentives for people to actually start this. Because what do we have here? We've got riots, we've got joblessness, we've got all this shit to contend with. Who's going to throw money at us at this stage? What happened in Natal is the greatest example of this. Koketso, go.
Yeah, I like actually how you got into that part of it. And you're right. People don't talk about this enough. Unfortunately, we live in a country where, whether we like it or not, we have a biannual strike season. It's the first one's around March, and the second one is around either late November-ish to early December. It's around there. So it's a biannual strike season where people feel very entitled even inside of their jobs, and that makes things very difficult for a business owner. Where how do you operate business when you know that people always have a high propensity to strike, particularly at the lower sectors of the economy where a lot of the groundwork needs to be done? I'm talking manufacturing, mining. If you're a commercial farmer, your farm workers and all of that. So we have this biannual strike season that comes and goes. And even lockdown, even 2020 lockdown didn't exempt the usual shenanigan of strike season. We still had strikes occurring on schedule, even last year of all times, because again, never mind the fact that everyone is going through some form of difficulty, people still felt that entitlement. Now, on the China thing, probably the saddest thing, and I'm bringing this up because I mentioned Mafikeng earlier, but you drive through towns and small communities, and you can see the remnants of what used to be a warehouse, a factory, it could be anything. Textiles is a very big example, and there were whole sectors that were, whole towns dedicated to the textile industry. But even beyond then, you drive through small towns and you can literally see that, this used to be a somewhat thriving community. Everyone knew each other because half of all the adult population that was working probably worked in, a handful of places. And you can think of places like Vanderbijlpark where ArcelorMittal is. That's quite a large town. And you can assume that once upon a time, when it was still named ISCO, half the town worked at ISCO, and that built up whole communities. But we don't have that anymore because we've kind of been legislated out of productivity, where the law actually favors the employee to such an extent that even now, and we're seeing this, it's becoming more and more prevalent. And anyone who's been in a job hunt for the past 4 years will probably agree with me that a lot more companies are more willing to hire people on a temporary contractual basis instead of permanent employment for this very reason. You hire someone permanently, and then a year or two down the line, if they make life difficult for you, you can't actually let them go. So it makes a lot more sense to say, right, you're on a 12-month contract, and there'll be an option to renew it, of course, of which 9 times out of 10 it will get renewed, unless you really mess up at your job, of course. But that's where we find ourselves right now. You can't even dedicate your life, you can't even dedicate a portion of your career in the same company like a lot of our parents and generations before mine did, because no one is willing to hire you on a permanent basis like they used to in the past, and that's a problem.
Wow, that was just, so loaded with meaning. There's just so much there to unpack. Like, that was brilliant. Because yes, we really don't live in our parents' universe anymore. And everyone likes to think that the ANC is so great because they gave us these labor laws. All these labor laws are the things why we have so much unemployment. Like you said, employers are so nervous to hire anyone because they know once they do that, it's so unlikely they can fire them. So it's not a society of competence. It's a society of literally carrying the weakest among us, and the rest of us have to suffer for that. And it's absolutely appalling because, yes, it means that competent people can't get a fucking chance because they have no idea what the hell is going to happen to them. And like now I've lost my train of thought because there's just so much there to unpack. Yeah, come back to me.
Xavier, go.
Okay, you brought up a good point, and before I get into the labor laws of South Africa, let me start with China. I can talk about China for days. I love China and I hate China in the same sentence. Guaranteed, they're amazing, but they're also terrible people. If you look at what Trump achieved, and I know Trump is a dirty word on the internet everywhere now, but if you look at the facts of Trump's administration, he actually made the East Tigers pay. America was becoming a consumer nation. America's always been a consumer nation, but they used to produce. So they were producing and consuming their own goods. They produced their own tobacco, they produced their own cars, and all of that started shifting to Asia very slowly. And it was subtle at first. And it was, we'll make more money if we produce in China and then ship here. It's actually lower than the cost of producing here and not having to ship. And that looked attractive for a lot of people, the cheap labor, the ease of production, the speed of production. China's, I think it's made in time, or I can never remember the terminology, but they manufacture just in time. It's just in time manufacturing, sorry. And that is a key component of China's economy. If they go to war today, they are building tanks yesterday. They're ready for that production. And it's funny what Carter said. You go to war to China today, it's not a physical war, it's an economic war, and Australia is feeling that now. They spoke out against China first, more than Trump did, and they're paying the price for that now. If you look at the inflation they getting on their goods, it's ridiculous. And this is after the Australian economy was decimated. They don't have much production anymore. Their wool industry was completely dependent on China's purchasing. And now that they're not purchasing, it's left these sheep farmers with tons of wool and no way to sell it. No one in Australia produces carpets or clothes. It's all, garage industries, no massive industries anymore because China took that away. And if you look at what Trump did, he put them in a corner that they could not get out of. China was actually begging Trump to, hey, come, let's negotiate. Nobody's brought China to that. And, Koketso rightly said, go to any town in South Africa that's not a major town. And the Chinese have infiltrated it in some way or the other. Whether it's, and the funny thing is the Chinese and the Pakistanis actually work together. You might not see Pakistanis in an area because there's Chinese. And you might see Pakistanis in an area where there's no Chinese. But the Pakistanis do not produce any goods. They only sell what the Chinese produce. So, they've made the world their consumer as they continue to be the only producer. And that's made China very powerful in our world, that they don't actually need to go to a physical war with you anymore. They can simply influence your politicians, influence your economy, and you will bend or you will break. Carter, you want to take over, and then I'll come back to the labor matter.
I'll just do a quick segue. You just have to look at the Confucius Institute in China, how they've infiltrated the US universities. And then you also just have to look at what Putin did. So Putin also gave middle fingers to the EU and said, screw you guys. We're not importing all of your stuff. I don't know if you guys saw that. He actually took cheese and all the products that they imported and they put it in a landfill. And he said, we'll produce our own. Now, What happened there is the free market kicked in. Supply was non-existent, and there was obviously a hell of a high of demand. What happened in the next 3 to 5 years, Russia actually created industry. They started doing their own cheeses. They started making their own products, like left, right, and center. And they didn't need the EU because it was locally produced. So the problem with the EU is each little country has their own legislation on how you should import stuff and what regulations should apply. And they got tired of that rigmarole and they just said, screw it, we'll do it ourselves. So initially the impact is very dramatic. So that's a very nationalistic approach, right? You cut the beast off by the head and you say, we're going to do this. They incentivized the local people to start manufacturing and creating goods. And what happened? Because there was such a void in the market and the reward for coming in at that stage, and you can come in at a very high price point, it paid for all your equipment. You were able to recoup your equipment costs and manufacturing costs in a relatively small amount of time. So that kickstarted the Russian economy, and now they actually are producing a lot of stuff that they used to import, contrary to how the things work. What I'm actually advocating for is maybe not something as dramatic. What I do advocate for is start growing something. By God, if you get a nice Woolies tomato or a Checkers tomato or even a Pick and Pay tomato, keep those seeds, plant it. You can plant that. So today on Twitter, I saw again someone saying, oh, you need land to plant. Bullshit. You can have a little container in your windowsill. You can take herbs, buy one herb, especially basil, and you start cutting that basil as it grows, and you can make many basil plants ad infinitum. Once you've got enough basil, you can actually sell the basil or create basil pesto. One step, if you just process something one step, or you take tomatoes and you make a tomato paste, you've got a product that has a lot of value and people are willing to buy it because people like homemade stuff that's good. The shit in the stores that we get in cans is not as flavorful. I grow for flavor. So I look at ingredients, tomatoes, peppers that are flavorful, and I cater for foodies and restaurants. And then if they want a paste or something, we talk rates, I make it for them. You can grow microgreens. There's a lot of stuff you can do with very little space. So this illusion that people have that you need land to do something is nonsense. And then if you've got, obviously in Bethlehem, we've got a lot of apples, right? So you take what you have in the area. There are a lot of apple farmers here. So I can take apples, the ones that you don't sell in the store, they're ugly or deformed, but they're still perfectly good. There's nothing wrong with them. You can get a crusher. You can make apple cider vinegar. You can make apple juice with a crusher, or you can make apple cider and bootleg and sell that shit illegally if you really want to. But you've got options, right? Even if you're tiny, you can maybe make an apple pie. What I'm saying is you need to take what's in your environment, see how you can actually work with that and take what's available to you and you can turn it into a business. So you have to be innovative. So that's just my 5 cents on that. Like I want people to actually think outside of the box. When I got to Bethlehem, I used to be an IT sales consultant. I went back into technical, started technically, and then I started teaching as well. Now I'm giving classes online, remotely in Bethlehem to people in Joburg, Cape Town. I'm also looking for opportunities to do it internationally so I can maybe get some euros and dollars. That's the long-term plan. But I'm getting into this whole thing and I'm like, I can have a local gig and an international gig thanks to internet. So what COVID did is it accelerated this thing where people are no longer, they don't need to be in the cities to get the high salaries. You can be anywhere with internet and you can actually make good money. And if you I just like cities for personal reasons, lots of them. I'll give a few. The failure of our water infrastructure is a major concern to me. Our waste management is going to shit. And then obviously intermittent load shedding or something that's breaking the whole time. On a farm or a homestead or somewhere else, you can actually manage that better. So that's where I'll leave that for now. And yeah, that's my 5 cents. I think Dione wants to be next, and then Xavier or Koketso, feel free to fill the void.
Xavier, you were first. Let's go.
Okay, thank you. Just to add on, Carter, I mean, I live in it's basically a 2-bedroom apartment. On the 3rd floor, I have no ground space. And you know, I grew basil. I think we've both watched the same video from Epic Gardening on YouTube. I literally took a stem of basil that I buy my basil from a farm market in the center of Joburg. It's in a nice sleepy area next to Houghton. So he brings in the best stuff. And I bought my basil from him. This was basil that was cut maybe 2 or 3 days ago. I had then taken it, cut it again exactly how the video showed me. And after doing so, I then put it in like 6 or 7 bottles. Within 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I had about 12 plants of basil. And I was starting to, so I used to buy the basil from that farm produce, and I used to then turn it into basil pesto and sell it. So it's not big money, but then again, I haven't ever tried to market it big. Because, you know, there's a whole lot of certification you need for a home. So I was like, no, I'll sell it to a couple of friends. They enjoy it. It's fine. So it's a good 200 here, 200 there. It keeps the lights on. But, you know, I eventually got to the point where I was producing enough basil not to buy from the guy at the farm produce anymore. So, you know, that's me living in an apartment, no ground space, all indoor, no patio, you know, no actual functional farming, traditional farming. And if you look at what they're doing in the Netherlands, you know, the Netherlands, it's an interesting story because the Netherlands is now, it's been for many years, the primary, tulip producer in the world. And tulips, I'm sure if you've ever bought tulips, you know how expensive they are. And they moved from just producing tulips. I visited the Netherlands in the year 2000. When I visited again, they were moving into tomatoes, potatoes, things that were never grown in the Netherlands. This is a country that had severe food security issues and imported pretty much 90%. I mean, I was in a supermarket in the Netherlands eating strawberries from South Africa. Now, if you go to the Netherlands, everything is produced in Netherlands. So you won't get strawberries from South Africa anymore. And it was shocking because like within the span of a decade, they've become one of the world's producers, Europe's main producer of herbs and, you know, soft flesh vegetables. And all of their agriculture is either vertical farming or hydroponic. So they don't do fields and fields like we do in South Africa, where you got 40,000 acres or so for potato farming. That doesn't happen in Holland because they don't have 40,000 acres. You know, most of their land is reclaimed. So they've got like one garden shed, and that garden shed can be producing 6 different crops on a vertical farming indoor with artificial lighting. There's no pesticides involved. I think you've seen the video, Kara. So you're familiar with it. And then coming back to the labor issue, you know, I have a unique privilege. I don't know if it's a skill or a gift, but some of the South African CEOs do take me a bit more seriously than they should. And as a result, we have some good conversations. I mean, I'm nobody of importance. I'm barely on an entry-level job. So, you know, there's no reason for them to take me seriously other than the substance of what I talk about. And a lot of them have said, you know, it's not so much our labor laws, because I've always been of the belief that our labor laws are the main constrictive area for foreign investment as well as local investment. We know that our government has always driven foreign investment more than local development. And that's been a stumbling block for South Africa. But every CEO, without fail, and I've spoken to some that were, you know, the product of BE transitioning, you know, they got to where they are because they're talented, but also because of BE. And I've also spoken to guys who were self-made from pre-South African democracy till now. And they've got, you know, businesses that are supranational. They've expanded to other African countries as well. And not one of them can agree with me on the fact that our labor laws are bad. What they say is an issue is that the unions are bad, like Koketso has said. They say the unions are constrictive. And an interesting perspective is that nowhere else in the world was a new government formed using a tripartite alliance where the union was included in government. You know, when the ANC took over, they didn't just take over as the ANC. It was an alliance of the ANC, it was an alliance of COSATU, and it was an alliance of SACP. Now, you don't hear COSATU and SACP getting around the table with the ANC before elections and saying, this is what we're going to do. They don't do that anymore. When they took over in 94, they did that. And then suddenly, SACP was where SACP is now. It's ridiculous. It's not even a functional organization. I know a lot of you know Carl Neyhouse. He was involved in Bladens Monday. It's like where ANC guys go to die. It's not a good place. And then COSATU is like every time the ANC says yes, COSATU now says no. Previously, it was COSATU said yes, ANC said yes. So we don't have a functioning tripartite alliance anymore that actually enabled the South African democracy. And that has made a serious impact on the ability of the ANC to govern. They're not in control of their own, alliance. Forget having an alliance with the DA, forget trying to govern. And with that in mind, how do you even go about saying, okay, listen, let's develop locally? Because you actually have to bring COSATU back to the table and say, let's actually work together again. And COSATU is not prepared to do that anymore, because COSATU wants something different to the ANC. As a result, our ANC government has been consistent in the fact that it wants foreign investment because they don't need to work with COSATU. What happens is they bring someone big like Ford South Africa. Ford comes into South Africa, they invest $1 billion, and the South African government is happy. They show us, hey, we invested $1 billion. They don't show that the plant in Ford by Rosalind and PE is suffering because there's a strike every 3 weeks. Or they don't show that, listen, COSATU is stopping this, they're stopping that, they're stopping that. Ford takes the damage because what else can they do? They've got $1 billion invested here. If they pull out, they lose it. So, in a way, they prefer foreign direct investment because it's like taking a company hostage. It's the easy kill. To develop locally, our government would actually have to put in real work. And I don't think they're prepared to do that.
Well, I suppose my first question would be, if we did have this tripartite alliance, wouldn't things be much worse than they are? So, in fact, maybe part of our saving grace is that there hasn't been this alignment, because what I experienced in Canada is that they have no freedoms because their government is so effective in their bureaucracy. They can actually enforce all of their rules. Whereas in South Africa, our government is so incompetent, they cannot. So South Africans have ways of getting around all of those rules to still actually experience their freedoms in a way that overseas governments just can't manage. And that's the reason I moved back to South Africa when everyone in Canada, when I actually had the opportunity to become a permanent resident of Canada, and everyone said to me, you're the stupidest person ever to move back to South Africa. And I was like, well, you haven't actually lived in Canada, have you? So until you've actually lived in Canada, you've experienced national healthcare, which is atrocious. You've experienced the people where they're basically all sheep. And you've actually lived in an environment where every part of your existence is controlled, and it's effectively controlled because the government is more efficient than in this country. You actually don't know what it means to live in a foreign space. And coming back to South Africa is where I felt I was coming home, because at least I could find a way around those inadequacies. And I think that at the bottom of this, what we're asking is, why should you become state-proof? Because this government has failed in every single way. And we have no idea when we're going to be liberated from this government. Because like you say, it's infiltrated so many spaces that we have no idea when we actually might be freed from this. Like many socialist and communist countries overseas. We don't know when this is going to end. So the best we can do is become self-sufficient, because it means that whatever the government does, we have recourse. And that's become, in my opinion, the galvanizing, positive cry of South Africans. Find a way to get on without the government. Because one, they're very inefficient, so they're really incompetent. And secondly, you could get to a space where they don't actually impact you in any real way. Find that space and get on with your life.
Sure.
Okay, so I saw your hand was up.
Yeah, it's quite a lot to chew there. Okay, let me rewind. I suffer from, I don't know what this condition is called, but it's along the lines of, I think so far ahead that I can forget what my next sentence or word is going to be. But on the tripartite alliance, I think maybe it's worth noting there that the reason that alliance largely exists, I'll start with the relationship between ANC and the Communist Party. Next door in Mozambique, you'll remember the influence of Samora Machel, who was a devout communist, a friend of Chris Hani, and many in the ANC, of course. So the communists really were the ones who empowered the ANC and kept that flame going, particularly while many of the ANC's due leaders were incarcerated in Robben Island, and a lot of them in exile. So it's really the support of the communists that kept the ANC going right up until 1992 or so. Now with the trade unions, it's not so dissimilar. I mean, just take our current president, for example. He was head of the biggest trade union in the country at some point, pre-democracy. So the relationships were always there, and it's a little bit like me and a buddy of mine being friends, and then at a later stage, when I make it to the big time, I decide to take my friends with me. Along with all their ideologies and everything, because the problem with this sort of table setup is it's designed for me and my friends to eat. And by putting my friend at the table, I'm also putting in his bad ideology, etc. So yeah, now going back to the state proofing here, it's very difficult because from where I sit, really, and again, I'm not a property owner or anything, but how do you actually break away from something like an ESCOM where you pay the municipality for the electricity you use, and the municipality will only pay ESCOM, regardless of what you do? The agreement is always in place. Even if you move out, whoever replaces you where you are has to pretty much deal with the same thing. And that's at the electricity level. Water, very similar thing, where, water is pretty much a national asset as well. And so you can't really, unless you drill your own borehole, of course, you don't have any alternatives, if I can put it like that. And for as long as those needs are firmly in the grasp of the state, how do you actually move away without basically turning your life upside down? How can someone live in the city and exercise some form of independence away from the state, where perhaps you can generate your own electricity to the best of your ability? But again, we're faced with a problem where, even if you go the solar route, for example, a lot of the equipment is seen as high value imports, which carry a very heavy tax. So we basically priced out of going independent by the state that sees what's going on and is not afraid to actually even introduce even further tariffs, because in their minds, they justify this by saying that only the really wealthy can afford to make such moves. And so this is our way of taxing the rich, forgetting, of course, that it's the rich who pay most of the tax. And that's a separate discussion entirely. So what are the actual practical means that someone can put in, maybe, I've given this a lot of thought in the past, where I've come up with ideas like maybe the solution is use a hell of a lot less energy, but all that does is mean that my money doesn't go, or less of my money goes to an ESCOM, and because ESCOM is receiving less money from me and others, they can't service their debt, and then in turn, because they can't service their debt, they raise electricity prices again. So it's a catch-22 from where I'm sitting. But how can one actually do something about all of this without necessarily having to turn their life upside down? Yeah.
Xavier, you can go first. I'll add to it. I'll add something right off the bat. There's a company called Art Solar. They actually manufacture locally. They're based in Pietermaritzburg side, and they actually manufacture a hell of a lot of the panels themselves, and they have inverters. So my quick and dirty answer would be is maybe having a system that's modular that you can build up with time. So you save a bit of money. It also depends. Xavier's in an apartment. It's very difficult to do anything in an apartment. The day will come where you have glass. There's already in America, I know you get tiles on your roof that are solar, or you get glass that's solar. But again, those things take time. If you have autonomy there, having an inverter and maybe a panel or two and powering selective things, and then taking things that currently run on electricity and maybe converting to gas is a great idea. And then when you buy appliances, buying appliances that have a much lower power drainage, those A+ level appliances is a great idea. You will pay more, but in long term, you don't get gouged by ESCOM. So you're right, it's a trade-off. Xavier, I'll give over to you for now, so please continue.
Okay, thanks, Carter. Koketso, I've got a lot of stories, so it's hard to pick one. Okay, basically pre-COVID, I was brought on in my current company, which is a visa company in the tourism industry. I was brought on as a turnaround guy. What the director had is a conventional company based in Sandton, very successful, no issues, but he was looking to move to Mauritius. And in so doing, he wanted to not state-proof, but consolidate to a point where his holdings in South Africa were a lot more manageable remotely. So, in a way, it was pre-COVID, preparing for COVID. And what we had settled on is getting a house, because in Sandton, we were in the heart of Sandton, basically on Grayston Drive. And every time load shedding kicked in, our business went down completely. And we spent 35,000 Rand on inverters and, all sorts of things. We got connected to the diesel generator in the complex. The office block was supposed to be completely ESCOM proof for 2 days, but the power never lasted more than 7 hours. That's how much our electronics was drawing. And it was impossible to, decrease our load because we needed all of that equipment to operate efficiently. So eventually what we decided is we'll move to a eco complex. At the time, that was in Waterfall, Midrand. What they were offering was a full turnkey premises, solar panels installed, solar geyser installed. We were never going to use the solar geyser, but anyway. Solar geyser included solar panels, batteries, and they claimed 18 hours of power uninterrupted from the batteries and the solar system. They claimed that this system was around 300,000 Rand. To buy the property would have been 3.4 million Rand. To rent the property was 22,000 Rand. At the time in Sandton, we were paying 60,000 Rand, inclusive of the, the diesel connection to the generator, all that nonsense. So we made the move, and we moved pretty much the entire office into a 3-bedroom home that was supposedly green. In the time we were there, it was 2019. There was a lot of load shedding. I can never remember why. But there was a lot of load shedding, and we got to test the system out. This was at the time, apparently state of the art. Waterfall put the best stuff in. In 2 months, we blew 6 batteries. These were high-end batteries, and they were serious. If I tell you the size of these batteries, I think it was like a truck battery. If you've ever seen a truck battery from a truck, was that size. We blew 6 of them. The system had 6 installed. We blew all 6, but not simultaneously. It was 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. And they used to wait, they said it took 3 weeks to order it and bring it in the country. But we waited up to 6 months at one point, just for the batteries. And then they claimed 18 hours, and the solar was just not capable of running 6 hours. So we were lucky if we were getting 6 to 3 hours. And that was, when I swapped, we made the change from desktop PCs, which was what we had previously. We sold and consolidated that. We replaced it all with laptops. So we went completely energy efficient for this office. And even then, we were still struggling. The internet went down. Our PABX system went down. And then you have to restart everything, get back on the inverter. So essentially, even with the state-of-the-art stuff for rich people, supposedly Waterfall is a very rich area. I don't see it because the people there are not rich. Believe me, I've been there. Unless you're in the villas, they're not rich. They all financed to the hilt. So they pretty much the same as us. They just got good credit records. But generally, those systems were not efficient for you to get state-proof. And I think that's what, Carter and everyone wants to do. Then I want to turn to my situation post-COVID. Basically from March 2020, my salary went from, 12,000 Rand a month to 0, completely 0. So I haven't been paid since March 2020. I'm still employed. What that meant is that, basics like electricity, which previously weren't an issue, now become a question of, do you need to switch on the kettle again? Are you boiling half a kettle? Are you boiling a full kettle? And slowly through that phase, we ran on prepaid electricity, which was swapped just to, add matters and make them worse. They swapped our complex from the normal electricity that we used to have to prepaid in the middle of COVID. So you walked into a situation where now you're paying just on the service for prepaid 100 Rand more in service charges and tax, because your VAT on electricity is like 15%. And then you're also paying a service fee of 50 Rand to the guy who manages the prepaid. So, where I was 700 Rand before, I was now 1,200 Rand with no income. So I said, no, something's got to change. I got to do something here. I turned my geyser to 60 degrees. And now what I do is we switch the geyser on. It gets to its heat, 60 degrees, or it gets to about 35. And then we bath only with the hot water. So there's no cold water mixed. So the hot water is basically hot enough for you to say, this is a comfortable bath. You're not boiling. So the geyser never boils to 60 degrees, but it's set to 60 degrees and you can just bath with the hot water. That saves, basically, it saved me on a geyser without swapping to energy efficient. It saved me from 6 units to boil the geyser once a day to 2 units, which is a massive saving. I went down from 1,200 Rand electricity to where I now pay 450 Rand electricity. Just by doing, I was so used to leaving my computers and things on standby. I now go to each plug and I switch it off. As soon as I'm done, I switch it off. And that saved me. So you don't realize how much power you're actually using. But again, it's not state-proof. You're just reducing, like what Koketso said, you're actually inconveniencing yourself. Because at the end of the day, the less money, and we've seen this with the new CEO of Eskom. The man's turned around the business to a point where it's actually looking at profit now. This is the first time we've seen this of Eskom in 27 years. We actually have a proper CEO who comes from private sector and understands business. But at the same time, electricity costs have increased quite a bit since he's taken over. It's no coincidence. He is running a business, that's what we wanted, but it's now costing us. And Koketso is quite right that if the demand for electricity goes down because people have gone state-proof, the cost of electricity will go up. It's basic supply and demand. So that is something you have to look at. And for us, you know, with Koketso and I living in Johannesburg, that's not ideal. So the only option, in my opinion, is to actually support a different state. And that would be your local elections and voting for a capable government. So that's really your only option. But in that case, you know, you've got cases like Mfuleni. To put it in perspective, I joined Twitter only because I wanted to be in politics. I figured it's the easiest entry into politics. I was sorely mistaken. It's a mess. Don't join Twitter for politics. It's terrible. Join politics. Yes, anyway, I joined for that. And I followed various elections. Mfuleni was one. Mfuleni is right next to Midvaal municipality in Gauteng. So basically, they're neighbors. And Midvaal is run by the DA. The man in charge is a visionary. The municipality in the last term has grown exponentially. It's gotten rid of bad debt. It pays its accounts on time. There's no issue with contractors. There's no outstanding debts. Then you got Mfuleni, which was declared insolvent. The municipality actually went bankrupt completely. It required a new vote. They were ANC before. Guess who they vote for again? After having sewage in the streets and no electricity and no water, they vote for ANC because KFC is nice. Anyway, so they voted for ANC. And 2 weeks later, they end up complaining. There's protests in the street. And they're complaining that Midvaal should pay for their electricity. And Midvaal was like, no, we're not going to do that. You guys have your own problem. And then you look at Mamuza, where, you know, the EFF thought they would win their first ward in 2020. And they went out there, they cleaned the streets. It was literally the most work the EFF have ever done in any ward anywhere in South Africa. They were so confident that they would take this. They ended up getting 12% of the vote in the entire ward. The ANC won because Fikile Mbulula came there. It looked like the ANC was going to lose. In 2 hours, he danced on the stage, and the next day, Mamuza won. ANC, done. So now it's back to the same problem. They've got new characters in the same municipality, robbing the municipality blind in every way possible. Cake tenders, pencil tenders, filing cabinet tenders, everything you can name, they've got it. And this is the thing. So as much as the DA is a horrible party to some people, it's a racist party to some people, you got to look at the facts, the cold hard facts. When you're voting in a local election, you're not voting for, the DA supports child abortion. You're not. They're not going to do that at a local level. You are actually at a local level only voting for your local government, the people who are going to make sure the water is paid, make sure the electricity is paid, make sure the roads are paved, make sure potholes are closed. And those are basic things. The DA is never going to be able to take a word and say, we're legalizing abortion till the last term, or we're going to, decrease the child grant to R1. They're never going to be able to do that without a parliament that is 2/3 majority. So you don't have to worry about those ideological things from a party during a local election. And they're trying to draw your attention. Don't vote for a racist. Don't vote for this. Don't vote for that. Doesn't matter. You need someone who can really manage your municipality, state-proofing or not. Because even if you are state-proof and the roads collapse, you're in a bit of a crap place, unless you've got a tank or something, So, yeah, I don't know, Kara, if you want to take over on your experience there in Bethlehem.
Yeah, I'll give you my 5 cents on that. You've made a few interesting points. We do have shitty roads here. I'm 60 kilometers outside of town, so it's potos galore. So it's like dodge a portal every time you go home, especially if you had a few drinks. It's quite fun. So so that's not the best. What I can tell you is we stumbled upon a place where we're paying $2,500. It's water, electricity, and internet included. It's a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom place. So we really got it lucky, dude. Like this is a saving grace, because if you don't have the capacity to save monthly, everything else, like you've experienced, if you are on breadline or below that, you know, when you get cut from your job or your salary gets cut, you're leaching into that savings, and you end up with a zero-sum game, right? Now, usually you would pay in Joburg anything from 6.5 to 9.5 grand for even a bedroom place. Sometimes depends on the area. That leaves some space for some resources to actually invest, right? So the idea here is to get a few UPSs on the internet, get a few solar panels in time, and then have a system that's modular that we can actually rely on. So in a sense, being in the rural areas, especially if you're on a farm or a plot where you can actually make modifications, that actually helps us to kind of be more state-proof, because like you said, right, we've got a fixed fee for everything. So we don't have meters or anything at this stage, but I'm not waiting for that to happen. I'll still get a solar panel, maybe with a battery pack, make sure the basics run, right? Like your internet and your computers at the very least. We do have gas stoves and gas ovens, so we're good in that front. And then obviously on farms, you have boreholes, or you have to do water catchment. We've got boreholes with pumps. But again, if Eskom hits, there's no water. So you have to have a water supply. So you have to plan for these things as well. So yeah, it's a different scenario for different people. An apartment's different, a townhouse is different. Your own house, if you've got a house that you're renting with people or yourself, that's different. The context changes. You've got a bit more or less freedom. So yeah, I see we're kind of at the end of the time. So I'll just close by saying that I think food production is the lowest hanging fruit. So by merely just planting some things you like, it's a good way to start. I've got the StateProof Pioneers. It's a Microsoft Teams group with different topics. So I've got the StateProof group, and I've got food production, food preservation, going solar, all these different topics. So whatever you're interested in, you can go into these channels. I'm trying to get experts from all over the show to actually be included here, because we need competent people that can speak to these things. And I'm also adding content to these channels that are relevant to the specific discipline or field of knowledge. So people can actually, what I'm trying to do is I'm creating a kind of a centralized community. But what I want in the end of the day, I want local communities in urban areas. So if you're growing basil, for instance, and someone's growing tomatoes, you can actually start bartering a bit there and say, cool, let's do a trade. Get away from the money system a bit and actually use products that you produce and start trading this. And obviously scale that accordingly. So that's the kind of mission I'm trying to accomplish. That's my mission. And I invite all of you to this team. I've already unsolicitedly added Xavier. Maybe Koketso, if you're interested, I'd like to add you as well. And it's just like-minded individuals, right? That like freedom, that don't like this boot on top of our necks the whole time from the state, and people that just want agency and liberty. And that's the things I advocate for. And the ability to trade with whoever they want, with whatever they want. And trade is not strictly just always product. It can be skills, and it can be tools as well. If I've got a fruit press and I can make cider, I can actually go to someone that has a pear tree and make some pear cider for them as well. And then I've got an IOU from them. So next time I need them and they've got something that I need, I can ask them a favor. And I want to build these communities and these networks for these things. So that's what I'm trying to accomplish. I want to do it on a national level where people mobilize locally and rely on each other more and become state-proof. So yeah, that's kind of my last message to everyone here. So yeah, I'm signing off. Anyone else can go and say your last kind of words.
Sure, I'll weigh in. I think that at the end of the day, everyone thinks that I'm a conservative or libertarian or whatever they I think. I mean, I started out as a liberal. I did. Politically, I was a liberal for most of my life, until I went overseas and I saw what that meant. And I started seeing this creep of authoritarianism, where they started changing terms and they started appropriating more concepts, and they started literally telling us we had to think a certain way, even in the context of philosophy, which for me is just anathema to the nature of philosophy. That is literally you contradicting yourself in terms. That is just not philosophy. And then I started seeing the creep of critical theory in Canada, and I started realizing liberalism has become authoritarianism. And like anything, on the left or the right, any extremism, doesn't matter what it is. You're talking about the Nazis, or you're talking about the communists. It starts in small steps, and it usually starts with terms. It's usually how it starts, is conceptually. How do you conceive of a person as opposed to another one? How do you think of them? What do they think? What is thought crime? What is committing a sin? And throughout history, we've been presented with examples of how tyranny creeps. And whenever I draw attention to this, I'm told I'm paranoid, I'm insane, I'm comparing things that do not compare. And I'm like, are you insane? Do you actually know anything about history? And I think that the StateProof Stoic is essentially about combating that. It's finding a solution to it, saying, stop depending on the state. State is not a solution. The state is the problem. And we've seen that again and again and again, and we refuse to accept that the solution to our problem is personal responsibility. It's not relying on a body to make your decisions for you. It's learning how to think for yourself. It's becoming an agent in the true sense, not in the way that feminists use it, because that's fucking just derailed entirely. And if we do not choose to take that responsibility, we are part of the problem. We are complicit in that tyranny. I know people don't want to accept this, but that is what we're faced with. And we are facing very dark times. Looking at Australia, looking at these states with this vaccine, we are facing very dark times. And if we do not choose to be independent of that, we will become part of the problem whether we like it or not. Those are my closing comments.
Should I go? Sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's rare that I actually don't know what to say. But yeah, I mean, it's funny that so I read quite a bit. I don't like reading fiction. It's except for science fiction. That's another story. But I read quite a bit, and I prefer to read for not just enjoyment, but to actually gain knowledge. And because of this, I end up reading a lot of history. And so, unassuming as I may be, I've read up quite a lot, especially with history. And I'm just reminded about how continental Europe has literally emancipated themselves from 1,000 years of tyrannical rule by nobility and kings, etc. They've got it figured out. And now we're sitting in 2021, and people somehow want to, now that states are a thing, want to take us back there. Back to where Europe fought each other off of. The reason people got onto ships to sail west to the States was to get away from that. Now a few generations later, now that, people have forgotten what their ancestors did 7-8 generations prior, they find themselves slowly advocating for that. But the only difference being this time around, we are not going to follow a bloodline. We are going to follow a political party or a political ideology. So it's it's not only, it's just fascinating to observe, but it's also very worrying in that, you know, that's not the lifetime I want to be part of. I don't want 6 generations down the line, my descendants to say, you know, to mention me as an ancestor who fought against that, in much the same way we're speaking about Europeans who crossed over to the Americas for that reason. So it is important that, you know, we have conversations about, you know, what can we do in our small capacities to, at the very least, shield ourselves. And ultimately, none of this or all of this will culminate to somehow states becoming a hell of a lot smaller than they are, particularly in large land masses like Africa, like in Australia and the likes. In future, I don't think it's infeasible to say split Australia up into 5, 6, 7 different countries. I don't think it's infeasible to think of South Africa as saying, let's split South Africa similar to our provincial boundaries into 5, 6, 7, 8 different countries as well. You know, so yeah, I'm hoping things end up that way. And I believe that's the only way we'll actually retain some form of order, if I can put it like that. You know, let's have a Gauteng province with just 15 million people, for example, and then move forward into the future like that. And the conversation start off with something like, you know, separating yourselves from the current state. And more people need to basically have these discussions, because it starts off small, just like it did in Europe, where someone comes up with the grand idea of rebelling against their noble, you know, their noble regions and the like, and it quickly turns into, let's get on a ship. Yeah.
Yeah, guys. I mean, this has been quite an amazing intellectual discourse. I'm glad to have met you all in person, sort of. But you know, it comes back to what Kara was saying. It comes back to what Dione was saying, and it comes back to what Koketso just said. You know, the idea of state proofing is going to be looked at as an attack on the establishment, and it's not. But it is going to be looked at as an attack on the establishment, and as a result, you know, advocating state proofing, you're going to be attacked. You know, one prime example of this, and you know, Koketso, maybe you've tracked it in your history. I also try to read as much history as possible because we repeat so many of the mistakes. But you know, the Afrikaner community in South Africa has always been of the opinion that you need to be self-determined and self-sufficient. And you know, we've seen that consistently with them. They just put up a 300 million rand university, not funded by the government. There's zero funding from the government. This was done by them. They built it, they've launched it, and they'll be running it. And if you look at that interview that Concurakel Ernst had with the leader of Solidarity, I can't remember his name, but he speaks so stoically about being self-determined. And during my political journey, trying to find a party, I got in touch with the VF Plus, or the Freedom Front Plus. Now, many people avoid this party like the bubonic plague because they believe it's Afrikaner supremacists. It's not. These people are so dedicated to the idea of self-determination and self-sufficiency that I think if you gave them one specific municipality in South Africa, they would turn that into a metropolis, you know, the likes of which we haven't seen in many years. The so-called smart city. These guys would turn it into a self-sufficient, self-supporting municipality that produces its own food, produces its own electricity, and I can see that in my interactions with them. And then you look at, you know, the CEOs of South Africa who have, you know, a lot of us don't see, but private sector has insulated themselves from our government. No matter how many failures our government has, private sector succeeds. I mean, Nando's is an international brand today. Nothing South Africa does can destroy Nando's anymore. It's beyond South Africa. That's how big it's grown. I was so shocked at the outrage for the Nando's ad. In the UK, people thought Nando's was UK. I was like, guys, that's ours. We made that.
It's in Canada. It's in Canada. There's a Nando's in Canada, and I was like, I love you fucking guys. Well done.
But they're like, this is our brand. It's a UK brand. We love Nando's. And I'm like, but guys, you were never there. This is South African. This is ours. And they're claiming it as their own. So, the private sector has, silently state-proofed, whether we like to admit it or not. They are. They run their own economies. If you look at Checkers, it's an economy that runs throughout Africa. As far as Nigeria, well, they've pulled out of there now, but it's its own economy. Checkers is completely insulated from South Africa. In fact, if Checkers had to close their doors, the South African government would cry. These are the people that actually have power over our politicians. And then, coming back to what Koketso just finished on, and this will be my last point, it's exactly what you say. Europe worked very hard. It took about 200 years. I might stand corrected, but 200 years of tyranny through a monarchy of elites, nobility, a class system. They fought all of that 200 years or so, and each one eventually became self-determined. Some even split. There was a time that UK was one part of the Roman Empire. There was no Ireland. There was no Scotland. And they split because of their individual differences. And then UK united them again forcefully under a monarchy, strangely enough. But yeah, so we now seeing the rise of the political elite, and nothing has proved that more than COVID. You cannot name a single politician who lost their income during the time all of us suffered the income loss. All of us suffered something. The only thing that has been, that the one thing they haven't been immune to is COVID. COVID has killed a few politicians, which was surprising. These are the guys with the best healthcare in the country. So, yeah, we are reaching the point where a political elite, left or right, or middle, or socialist, or Democrat, or whatever label they want to go by, are completely insulated from our problems. I was in contact with a neighbor for Didi Mabuza, so David Mabuza's actual neighbor. And this guy says when load shedding kicks in, Mabuza's house is full of lights. There's no load shedding at Mabuza's house. So you can just imagine the state-of-the-art solar electricity he's got in his house, that he doesn't need to worry about Eskom, But his neighbor and all of the other neighbors in a very high-end area are all suffering load shedding, and they taxpayers. So yes, just to end, we are going to be fought, no matter how small you try to state-proof. You are going to be fought either by family, by friends, by Twitter, by the elite, by the politics, by tax. You will be fought, but it's a good fight. So I think we can't go wrong with this. And I'd like to thank Carter for starting this and bringing me in, and hopefully we can make a real go of it.
Likewise.
Amen.
Oh, that's the idea. The reason why I'm so passionate about, and this is what I'll close off with the whole food thing, is our reliance on convenience and the supply chain is scary to me. When the ride started, I think Dione's best example is she cannot get eye drops anywhere. I don't know if it's a global shortage or a shock from that, but we went to multiple shops today and we're unable to find eye drops. I take food as the most base thing. Growing your own stuff, even if you start small, but eventually if you are able to actually grow stuff throughout the year, you're able to offset that inflation. So when supplies get low, so Zizi, you talk about the tomatoes, Zizi, the tomato producers, had a hell of a crop failure that instantly increased the prices of tomatoes. I don't know when you guys saw that as well. There was a hell of a price raise kind of in COVID, and everything became much more expensive. The idea with self-sufficiency is hedging your bets in such a way that you don't get hit by these things. It doesn't affect you in any material way as far as you can. And if you can at least do that with your basics, your vegetables and your herbs that you use, that's already a step in the right direction. Then if you've got extra space to spare, you might have a chicken or two, or maybe some poultry running around, which is chicken. And or some pork, and you can make your own bacon. But we'll get there in other episodes, because we want to take this whole concept and actually make it in such a way that you can expand upon it, and it should be scalable. So yeah, I just want to thank everyone here. Like, I know we've been chatting on Twitter a bit, and that we've come into similar kind of contentious issues that we've addressed, and I think in many ways we agree on some of the stuff, might disagree on some others. That's perfectly fine, but at least we're having the conversations that I think few people are either not willing to have, or they don't want to think in this way. But thank you all for joining tonight, and this is the first of many fireside chats where we just get together and chat about things. No official structure, can have some topics in the future. We'll see how this goes. Thanks everybody for joining. I'm signing out. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Oh, okay. I didn't know everyone's gonna leave. Okay. All right, and I can't hear you.